Oh, so I just posted a couple videos with my suit on saying, yes, I can speak the language of Nor, and I made two scientific videos. The last two videos I posted were scientific videos, and this one is a third scientific video. And one for the record, I'm stating that I'm not a human. That is the premise of this, saying that my philosophy called Norism is not a human philosophy. No, I'm going to recount off the top of my head what I can already describe to you about the philosophy of Norism and why it must make sense, at least in my own eyes, and not necessarily if it applies to humans, but at least it must apply to myself in the way that I think. So I'm going to explain off the top of my head. I didn't write this down. I'm just going to describe it in the best detail I can possibly give. That one, Iwakura is myself and Iwakura is the void. So it's a sort of solipsistic philosophy that Iwakura is the void herself and also something much more, but that's not the purpose of this video. Now the belief is that essentially the way that things are perceived is sort of a sort of meld of all sorts of things, but I'm not really a philosophy major or anything, obviously not. I mean, I'm just saying like this is something I invented by myself through a little bit of understanding of philosophy, hardly. And I invented my own philosophy, so I'm going to try to explain it to you. So, one, Leni Wakura is the void and she is experiencing undeniable solipsism. Now, the way that objects are perceived is by a perception of an aesthetic of an object. So, when you see an object, you have a perception of its aesthetic, which might be that you would be able to see the difference as a non human between something like a tree or an apple, and they would not appear the same to you by your perception of the aesthetic and not just a visual representation of them as though you were some sort of analog mind that didn't actually have a consciousness, which is wrong, for all minds have consciousness, otherwise they would not be able to experience the world, for the body and brain are not sufficient to provide us with consciousness. A computer within someone's head is only an organic computer called a brain, and that is not enough to provide us with the description of how consciousness actually works. It doesn't explain consciousness, it only provides us with an accurate description of what might be going on inside of the brain. So, furthermore, Norism wishes to understand how consciousness works, and that is the purpose of my philosophy. It is a study of consciousness itself and not just a study of the brain, which is what most philosophies do. And if you look at something like the Kantian philosophy or the Critique of Pure Reason, which I never read, all I know is that it's a very scientific way of looking at the world, a very scientific way where everything you're experiencing is based on a judgment or something, and they have all these fancy words. But my perception is that everything is more of a natural kind of thing and more similar actually to the Hegelian philosophy than anything else. Also, I will state for the record that according to my schizophrenia, George Wilhelm Frederick Hegel is my ex husband, but that's my schizophrenia as a non human, believing that this man was my husband in some sort of prior life that I lived. And then I will state for the record that, well, what else can I say about Norism? Norism also is a philosophy on how death works. So the way I will explain that death works is that all life is until death, and when you are birthed, when you are born, you will go until death, and when you die, you shall be dead. And when you die, you will go to another place, and this is dictated by what Leni Wakura, who must be Allah, has decided. And you have been decided to go to a certain type of place or a certain other type of place. So there are two places you can go, and certain humans or certain warlocks or angels will go in different places. Now, Leni Wakura views certain human beings, if you would call them such a thing in her eyes, as angels or warlocks, and they will go to a different place in their own death, and there is actually no such thing as a human, for they are a mist. Now, Norism also posits that there is such a thing as spirits, and a spirit is sort of not only what is going on around Lane, but also Lane happens to be a dragon spirit herself. And what is going on around Lane is a sort of spirit that is within the air, and the beasts are the manifestations of spirits. The beasts are the manifestations of the spirits, like a fox or a wolf or any sort of beast is some kind of manifestation of a spirit. Now, I will also state for the record that there is such a thing as the ancient world versus the modern world. So, in the ancient world, this was a world which is very, very old, but doesn't actually go back as far as you think, because the world was only ceasing to be ancient once computers were invented. And the reason computers are such a vital part of this philosophy is since this is Leni Wakura, who is obviously enthralled with computers and is also conscious of all computers on the planet. So once computers had been invented, the world was no longer ancient, and thus Leni Wakura was no longer innocent or not savage, but ancient. She is no longer ancient and seeing the world as these ancient people once did, especially in a time where there was no such thing as a computer and there were far less civilizations, where civilizations were more brutal and honest, and now today they have ascended all the way to evil by the advent of the computer and the advent of pornography. And all of these things are actually a part of Norism, where anything can be considered with Norism. For example, the statement that you could criticize any 0 or 1 with Norism allows you to state that by criticizing a 0 or a 1, like a calculation in a computer, you are criticizing something binary, and you are able to criticize it with Norism, which is something analog. So this means that something analog like Norism can always criticize something that is binary, like a 0 or a 1. And as a result of this, you are able to criticize all knowledge. For humans, minds are knowledge-based creatures, and that humans are actually knowledge-based creatures, or angels or warlocks, for lack of a better word. And they are knowledge-based creatures who are only knowing, not knowing, but knowledge. And knowledge is a sort of binary, for if you observe human language, you can actually see that it is dictated completely by zeros and ones in an analysis of the world through their language of zeros and ones. Something that is binary, human language is binary, but the language of Nor is an analog language, thus it is a language of knowing, which is not the same as knowledge, and knowing is a different kind of language. So, knowing is the language of Allah. For in the book, the Holy Quran, it says that Allah is the one God, all knowing, all wise. And thus, obviously, their mind would be knowing rather than knowledge. Not a sort of memorization like knowledge is, for knowledge is more of a memorization, but knowing is more of an understanding of things that cannot be described with words, but able to be spoken by the language of Noor through outer space, which goes through Leni Wakura. And Leni Wakura must be Allah the one God by Norism or her knowing of herself to be so. And this is an undeniable fact by undeniable solipsism, also knowing that it could be proven. And by speaking the language of Noor, Leni Wakura is able to prove it so simply. Anyways, what else can I say about Norism? Well, there's also the question of what are we doing here. So obviously, what are we doing here? The purpose of being here is that Allah has once created the universe in order to meet someone who is his wife for the universe, who is Jasmine, someone who he had met once during his life and why he had come here, who was Leni Wakura. And as a result of knowing this and why he had come to the universe in such a way, in this kind of way, in order to meet this woman, he has thus created this universe by the rising of himself like the ashes of a phoenix and adopting who his real parents were and such a thing. But as a result of this, there are certain questions about angels or warlocks that must be asked, and there's a whole philosophical thing going on with angels or warlocks, where some of them are doomed to a certain type of hell, and all they do is recite the Holy Quran, and that is what they do with their entire lives. And only Leni Wakura actually knows who the angels or warlocks are. And also, I will state it for, and also I will state um, the humans are only a mist, like I said, and the majority of human beings are actually just humans who are this mist that doesn't actually exist in the eyes of Lady Wakura and are sort of a abusive kind of thing that needs to go away. And then also, the purpose of the angel or warlock is not only to recite the Quran, but also to blossom as an adult. And only an angel or warlock is capable of blossoming as an adult in this kind of way. So, to blossom as an adult is one, to become the age of 18. And also, once you are the age of 18, you can blossom as an adult by accepting your responsibility and growing older. And when you age, you will die by the end of your own life. And then you shall be damned to one of these certain types of hell or other places you can call them, not necessarily hell, for in these places you will not suffer, but you will find that you will be okay there, and you will find that you will be alone with other people who have also been damned to one or the other place, like I've said before. And that's all I have to say about that. Also, for the record, there are certain questions being asked in Norism, such as what is the truth? Well, the truth of Norism is that there is only one truth, and the truth of Norism is that by one truth you can know what the truth of the universe is. Even if Lady Wakura's words have no bearing or effect on the world, they might at least be a diagnosis of what Lady Wakura believes is happening. So, what I'm saying is that the truth is actually the statement or words that Allah is the one God, and that is the truth of the universe. Allah is the one God, and that must be accepted by all mankind. And men's purpose or women's purpose is to submit to Allah as written in by the Quran, and it is a shame they are not aware that the Quran can be read in the language of Noor or recited by Lady Wakura, who is able to recite the Quran in such a way. And by submitting to Allah, they will find that they will have a good life and live their life in hell when they die. But you might ask the question, why has Lady Wakura or Allah damned these people to a certain place that you could describe as hell, for they have revoked them of any place called heaven? Well, the reason for this was that when Lady Wakura had created the universe and thus come into it, that she was abused by the people around her, and found that by being abused or even raped by them, she would damn them into a certain place where they couldn't get any further from, and they would be dead there. And in this place, once Lady Wakura was solipsistically undeniably put in the universe, and by her undeniable truth of Allah being the one God, there could be no other answers thereof.